Hi everyone, welcome to the Aware, Relaxed, Connected podcast. Join me as we explore approaches and orientations towards cultivating the physical body, the internal landscapes, the mind, and our relationship with reality as a whole. I'm your host, Craig Mallet. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode. Sorry once more for the delay. I have been super busy with plenty of things on my plate. I've got my retreat starting up in a bit over a week as I'm recording this, and plenty of other things going on as well, including a new course that's been released. You can find that course over on my courses page, which is just courses.craigmallet.com. It's all about releasing through the legs. So these are practices to sink your weight through your legs and kind of make contact with the ground. Very, very good for training your legs. It'll wake up all aspects of your legs, front, back, inside, outside, and generally teach you how to drop your weight into the ground. A good skill for all kind of internal cultivation practices. And once you have the hang of it, it's easily transferable into any kind of standing based or walking based practice or forms based practice or anything like this. So super useful to develop those skills. Head on over to my website if you'd like to check that out. On to the podcast itself. I've got a few topics I wanted to dive into. I don't know if I'll go over this over a few episodes or just do it in this one episode. We'll see how it goes and how it unfolds. But I basically wanted to talk about the role of visualizations in practice as I see it anyway, from the perspective I have in my cultivation practice. If you're not aware, visualizations get used quite frequently in esoteric practices. And so you'll have cues like, as you're doing a movement, say you're doing some sort of Qigong movement or yoga movement, and the instructor will cue you to visualize a light or visualize something divine, or usually it's something positive, right? You'll visualize something nice or some warmth moving through your body. You inhale the bright, pure light, you exhale the gnarly, gross, junky stuff, and you can visualize that in all sorts of ways. There are practices that use smoke as a main way of doing this, so inhaling different colored smoke and exhaling it. There are also versions of this practice where you can kind of visualize lights moving through channels and visualize the lower dantian is another one that gets visualized a lot. Visualize the lower dantian as a ball of light in your belly, and this light's getting brighter and things like this. They're reasonably common. I want to break down how they work, at least from how I understand it. Of course, other people may have different understandings from their experience, and that's fine. This is just to provide an angle for some people who may not have thought too much about these practices, and to get some explanation as to why I only use visualizations in very particular ways in my practice. So you'll generally get two camps. One camp will be really pro visualization, that they've done some visualization practices, it's made them feel really nice, and so they've stayed with that a long time. And the other camp will be like, no, visualizations are the enemy, they'll make everything work badly, they are dead ends, and so on and so forth. I actually think both of these camps are legitimate. They're just talking about entirely different things, and that's what I wanted to clear up today. So I'm going to use a bit of my experience too with people that have come along to my classes to kind of frame what I'm about to present here. And before I do that, I can just throw in the caveat. It should be a default, but the caveat that it's just my experience, and of course there are exceptions to these rules and so on and so forth. So just take it all with a giant pinch of salt, but hopefully these ideas can actually help someone. So what are we doing when we're visualizing something? We are essentially giving our awareness or our attention to something, the visualization, the imagination, created in the mind. And this mind creation, this imagined thing, this light or this smoke or what have you, is then kind of passed on often passed on to the body, not always. There are practices that are entirely visual, and we'll get into these as well. But in practices like Qigong and yoga, they're often then directed through the body. So you have this sense of me looking at, giving my awareness to a visual construct, which is in turn given to the body. If you think of this as like a communication node, that's the way I frame it in my mind, that an imaginal structure, something created in my mind, is like a communication node. This can be really useful for communicating with the external world, for building like a juncture between me and something I can't usually communicate with easily. So, for example, if I wanted to talk to my liver and find out what's going on with my liver, I could visualize my liver and have some sort of visualization of, what's going on with the liver, have this idea of me talking to the visualization and have it talk back to me. Or I could give it an image, let it take an image of being really nice and relaxed and functioning well, and drop that image into the liver. These can work. Methods like these, if you practice them, can actually provoke a change in the body. The issue with them is they're setting up a particular dynamic. They're setting up the dynamic of me here as my mind, my intent, my idea, sending a command to body as an external agent to me, as something other than me and something separate than me. Now, if I practice this, I can get really good at sending these commands, at telling the body, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? In the way of visualizations. And, as far as communicating with the body, it can be reasonably effective, particularly if you practice it a lot. But it maintains this separation or segregation of mind and body. The mind, the intent's over here. It's sending directives to the body, telling it, fix this, repair that, reorganize this, do X, do Y, do Z. And for the purposes of the cultivation that I'm into, this is not a dynamic we want to encourage too regularly. I kind of think of this as emergency medicine, emergency comms when dealing with me, as in my body. And in fact, the more I get to the more direct way of doing things, the less I need that visualization process. I don't want to treat my body as external to me, to who I am in a relative sense, as in like a separate, distinct me. I really want to become that separate, distinct me with the practices of internal cultivation. So, how practices of internal cultivation work is, rather than bringing the awareness to a process of the mind like a visualization, you're instead bringing awareness directly into the felt perception of the body. This is a rather particular process, and this process necessarily works better the more awareness is in direct contact with the body. So it is possible to have a kind of like split of the awareness, where some of the awareness is aware of the body and other parts of the awareness are aware of a visualization. And often in the beginning, you kind of have this kind of scattered awareness where it's doing something like this. It's okay. It's most people will have to go through some version of it in their practice as they're trying to release the awareness from the mind and the mental structures and get it into the body. But it's not where we want to stay, because it's simply more effective to have more awareness in the body to provoke transformation of the body and to provoke the union of opposites, because the body and mind are kind of opposites, and we're trying in these practices to bring them together, to unite them, to make the two into one. And if I keep using visualizations, I'm going to constantly reinforce the idea of the two, that they're separate, distinct things, that the awareness can only interact with the body via the mind. Instead, we're trying to get the awareness directly into the body, and this has a very peculiar set of results. I would say the first sign of the awareness touching the body or making contact directly with the body is you tend to get this kind of what I would call like an animation happening in the body. There is awareness, it contacts the felt visceral sense of whatever part of the body you're working with. And this part tends to kind of start moving, becoming animated in a way that it doesn't normally animate itself. It becomes animated and it becomes animated on its own terms. These movements, these sensations that appear can often be like reorganizing of flesh, releasing of tension, bits of the body sorting themselves out and putting them into new relationship with itself. It can be things like release. It can be things like restructuring, healing, stuff like this. These are all byproducts that are not caused by a particular intent. I'm not trying to make them happen. The only thing I'm trying to do is release the awareness from the mind into the body. It also tends to have this feeling of being confined or pressurized, the body being far more limited than the mind tends to be a little bit uncomfortable at least in the initial stages where the awareness sinks into the body, and it's like the awareness, normally free to expand through the infinite mental landscapes, is kind of confined to this one thing that's doesn't change very fast, and is kind of restricted and limited in a way. And there's a part of us that really rebels against this, that really is like, no, 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 I want to get back into the freedom of the mind. The body is too confined. And so you tend to, in the initial phases, get this rebellion where your system tries to escape this contact between awareness and the flesh and the visceral sensations of the body. That's just a starting thing. With time, the body opens up, especially if you train well, the cavities kind of expand, the space appears in the body. That spaciousness becomes a lot more comfortable for the awareness to soak into and occupy. And as that starts to happen, the more awareness you get in the body, the more the body starts to, the experience is as if you are the body and the body is aware of itself. Every component of the body is self-aware. They're simultaneously all independent and all aware of themselves. So it's strange. It doesn't have a sense of being in like a command center in your mind looking down on your body, but rather as if you are in the body looking out from the visceral sensation of the body, or sometimes even looking in from the visceral sensation of the body. So being aware of the body from the body. And that's the real kicker here. When I'm aware of the body from the body, the awareness is starting to merge with the body. Now, you can have little traces of awareness still stuck in mental faculties. With time and practice, you can get more and more awareness in the body. And the more awareness gets into the body, the more the body starts to naturally organize itself because it becomes aware of itself. It becomes self-aware. And of course, there's a question of identity here, that if I'm not the mind, then what am I? That's perhaps go watch my non-dual episode, or we might explore that in later methods. But from a cultivation perspective, this method of getting the awareness into the body allows the body to transform itself. It actually kind of provokes a very natural evolution of the body, and a very strong stimulation of the body too. Remember, I mentioned like pressure and this kind of like tingling and reorganizing sensation. So the more awareness gets into the body, the more the body starts to self-organize, starts to self-evolve, it starts to transform, and it starts to network itself. As different parts of the body become self-aware, they also become aware of the rest of the whole that they are participating with, and they start to work together in a kind of harmony. And with more practice, you can get more and more and more of this happening. The thing with this process, if you've had a taste of this process, you know that more awareness in the body equals that process working better, more effectively, more efficiently, and so on and so forth. It also means you've got less control of the mind on the body. You're actually releasing control. The more you release intent, the more you release the commands from the mind telling the body what to do, the more the body becomes free to be aware of itself and organize itself however it may. And the body is far superior than the mind at organizing itself, at healing itself, at doing all this stuff. So with enough practice, this mode of having awareness in the body, allowing the body to be liberated and self-organizing, is far, 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 like indescribably superior in its efficacy to dealing with the body via visualizations. Once more, that's not to say the visualizations don't work. It's just that they promote this function of mind controlling body rather than releasing that control. And so you've got to be careful. It depends what you want to do. It depends if you're actually interested in making this dynamic of mind controlling body, or more interested in liberating the body and the kind of unconscious from its binds that come from the mind. And so if you're interested in that liberation, in that freedom, then you want to be practicing more of the direct awareness way of doing things and less of the visualizations. That being said, the visualizations, again, can be used in an emergency. They can sometimes be used if you're having trouble getting awareness directly into a particular part of your body. Like as you get down into the body, there'll often be blank spots. Sometimes these blank spots you don't even know are there. Sometimes they're there, but you can't seem to get the awareness in. And so sometimes it can be useful to prompt that little blank spot with a visual image. Just throw an image at it, throw a visualization at it, stimulate it, wake it up, and then go from there with the direct awareness. That can work as a kind of, a little stepping stone. I don't use it that often myself, but occasionally it can be useful in the right timing. But more interesting than that is visualizations are very useful for setting up communication with external agency. And so before I get into that, I need to kind of explain what I mean by external agency. This comes back to the view of the world as being animate, as being alive, as being full of agency. So some systems describe this as being like, everything has a spirit, so the idea that the forest has a spirit. Han Solo talking to the Millennium Falcon has a spirit, and when he talks to it saying, hold together, he's talking to its spirit. He's building a relationship with it. Or like the person who talks to their car, or the furniture crafter who talks to the wood as he's crafting it, or she, whoever. This kind of idea that there is spirit imbued in everything, and certain degrees of agency within that spirit, as in external objects in particular get a personality. Like a car can have a personality, particularly, you get these old classic cars, and particularly if someone has been talking to them a lot, it seems like they're listening in a weird way. And old cultures knew that this was the case, and old cultures would talk to the land and to the trees and to the lakes and, to all the animate forces around. They would sing and do ritual for these animate forces and make offerings and so on and so forth. Not because it was something they believed, but because it was their experience that these things were alive. And it can be argued that the animate viewpoint is not a belief structure, but rather a direct observation of reality. Perhaps not enough time to get into those arguments here. I don't really care. It is my experience that the external world often acts like it has its own agency. And I have no way of proving if that's true or not, but certainly my life has improved when I decide to relate to the world as living and animate, and respect it as such, because when the world is not living and animate, it is dead, and because it's dead, I can do whatever I want with it. So I can, just cut down trees if I feel like cutting down trees. I can dig up holes in the ground if I feel like digging up holes. I can smash rocks if I feel like smashing rocks, and there's just no consequence at all. Whereas if I treat the world as if it's living and animate, then I've actually got to step back. I've got to see, does this hole really need to be dug? Does this branch really need to be cut down? Like, does this animal really need to be killed? These kind of questions suddenly become really apparent when the world is related to as being everything being alive. So that's the idea of an animate world. And within this idea, of course, you have the idea of all the deities and all the forces in the world, which, can be thought of as ways of communicating with those forces. So how can I communicate with the weather? Well, I have a deity of the weather, and then I communicate with the deity, and the deity controls the weather, and that helps me communicate with the weather. How can I communicate with the forest? Well, there are spirits of the forest, and then I can communicate with those spirits, and then they can affect the forest, and so on and so forth. This idea of having things be alive. Now, I'm not here to argue over whose deity is better, which one's the real one and which ones are the fake ones. From the animate perspective, all deities are valid, all spirits are valid, all notions of living world are valid. These things tend to, in my experience, tend to operate much like the normal world. So you've got all sorts of relationship dynamics between all sorts of people. Some of them don't talk at all, and some of them are in very close contact. But it certainly seems to be the case that these powers have their own personality, have their own nuances, have their own likes and dislikes, get upset and withdraw when you annoy them, or help you out and become your friends when you treat them well, and so on and so forth. And the imaginal space is a very good tool to develop these relationships if that's something you're interested in pursuing. How does it work? Well, if we think of the world out there, this vision of the world out there being somewhat objective, like there is more to this world than just my five senses and my thoughts, that my five senses and my thoughts are like a lens through which awareness looks to see the world, but I don't get direct access to that world. When I look at my monitor now while I'm recording this, am I seeing the monitor? No, the light's bouncing off the monitor, it's hitting my eyeball, it's getting inverted, it's hitting a retina, it's getting converted to an electrical signal. That electrical signal is being sent to the brain, it's being translated, and then it's projected to consciousness somewhere, and all I see is a mental projection of my visceral sense. Same goes for everything I feel in my body. Same goes for everything I hear with my ears. Same goes for everything I taste and smell. And so all of my five senses already suffer from this kind of filtering process, which means I can't see exactly what's going on in the world. And so if there were external agents moving, I might not be able to notice them with my five senses because my society has told me they don't exist, and therefore my brain is constantly filtering out any of those kind of movements as being nonsense. To train the five senses to pick this stuff up again, some people I've met have this very naturally, but it's difficult. It can be done, but it's very, very difficult. Whereas the imaginal gateways are much easier to work with because they're much more pliable. So what I can do is, say I wanted to speak to my dead loved one of some sort. I can sit down, I can close my eyes, and I can imagine them. And imagining them in front of me, I can talk to them and, get some closure or something like this. The issue with this is that this imaginal thing I've made in my mind, this projection of this person, how do I know that it's actually connected to something beyond a projection coming from my mind? How do I know that it's connected to an out there agent? I don't really. There's not really a way of confirming that, except by way of the information that you get from the exchange. And one of the pieces of advice I got about this when I was investigating these topics is, the mind is going to, when you do those imaginal practices and you imagine something like a past loved one, what you're seeing there is your mind projecting that person. It's not that person. But I treat this projection almost like a container. It's like a container that external agent beyond my senses, the world beyond the senses that I can't actually get to, which we might call the real world, the objective world, that I can't ever prove in any way is objective because there's no way to test it except for my faulty senses for the reasons I just went over. So, anytime someone else says it's like this or it's like that or that does exist or that doesn't exist, the only reference I have to prove that is through senses, which all suffer from this filtering problem. So if I see a projection, an imagined person in my head, and I talk to it, how do I know it's real? Well, it's real in the sense that I'm perceiving it, but is it useful? Is it a perception that has got its own agency? And if it doesn't have its own agency, it means it's just doing whatever my mind tells it to do. So this is where the practice comes in. You've got to continually practice how to create this container, but then how to release the container so that it becomes occupied or starts to act in a way that is not of my own personal choosing. And the best confirmations you can get from this is if you get new information that you possibly couldn't have known in any way, shape, or form, and that information is actionable, that you can do something with it. So often when we sit down and do these visualization practices, you imagine something, and of course our minds want to imagine, some sort of deity coming down and saying we're the chosen one. Oh, you're super special and you're this and you're that. That's probably going to be one of the first thing anyone runs into in these practices, and you need to just ignore this stuff. It's just the mind unloading all its usual garbage. It can be safely ignored. However, if this little visualization in between all its random unloading of your deep unconscious tendencies throws in a little, yeah, and on Thursday you should probably go down to the shop and look in this particular store and you'll meet someone there and that person's got something important to tell you, then suddenly that's like, okay, that's a bit weird. Why would I imagine that? And particularly if you then follow that advice and you go down to the store and there's someone there that tells you something very important, then you go, aha, I've had connection with an external agent, something that gave me information I didn't previously have that helped me in my life somehow. And from there, you get you keep practicing, you keep developing those relationships, and you keep testing it with, physical outcomes in your life. It's no good developing these imaginal relationships if they just stay in your head. If they're only ever like me imagining a Ferrari, oh, wouldn't it be great if a Ferrari just rocked up out front? Wouldn't that be the best? I'm just going to keep imagining a Ferrari and no Ferrari rocks up, then it's just, it's stuck in my head. Whereas if I practice with these imaginal containers and real information from the world out there comes through, then that's cool. That's another avenue of information I can get in my life, and it's another way of building stronger relationships with the world around me. So, for example, maybe I imagine that I'm talking to some spirits in the forest behind my house, and they say, you've got to do X, Y, and Z to tidy up the forest because something's being harmed, and you go down and you do that thing, and then you later notice that there's more bird life around, the animals look better, the trees have gotten greener. That's cool. That's a really nice way of interacting with the world, participating in the world, and helping the world in in a way that's not possible if you disregard the imaginal. So practicing with this, I think, is a really important tool. I just don't think it's a good tool for internal cultivation. It's more like a tool for cultivating relationship with external agency. Um, Now, it's my personal view that that external agency is one agency that's more like shaped in all these different ways. And, if that's going to appear to me as a visualization of my long dead family pet, and it's going to tell me something, my mind might go, was I really connected to my old pet dog? Or was that just an image my mind used to make sense of that information? And the real answer is I don't know. It's there's no way of proving it, and it doesn't matter. Was I really, if I go into my imagination and suddenly an angel appears with the glorious wings and it says do X, Y, and Z, was it really an angel? Like, I don't know. I don't know. My mind, the job of the mind is to filter these events of the world in a way that makes sense to me. So if I've been watching a load of movies, it's pretty normal that the mind will use images from those movies and from books I've read and everything to plaster over these events so that my mind can make sense of and digest and understand them. But just because I see that thing and the next person sees more like maybe an animal, and the next person just sees an aura, and the next person doesn't see anything, doesn't mean one person or the other is more or less correct. Not really. It's just a different filter. The thing that's interesting is what you can do with that relationship, what you can do with that filter, whether you can draw information through that filter that actually fundamentally affects your life. And so visual practices can be very, very useful for building a really nice relationship with particularly the external parts of your life. But I don't find them that useful for building internal relationships. They're better off using these kind of Negong methods that I like to teach, and those methods don't use visualizations. Now, if we look at each of these in a kind of like inside and outside, internal, external dynamic, one, we're bringing awareness into the internal landscape, which is basically a fancy way of saying we're bringing awareness into the felt sensory experience of the body. Because that's most of what we're dealing with in Neigong, in Qigong, in internal alchemy is felt experience. And we're letting awareness merge with that felt experience. And we're doing that in a way that brings more and more awareness into just that experience. And then that experience changes and it grows and all the rest. So then, as you're getting deeper into that experience, you're getting less and less into the mind, and you're getting more and more into the internal spaces, what we might call the internal spaces anyway. But that still doesn't mean we can't use the mind. It still doesn't mean we shouldn't interact with visualizations. We just have to do them with some care, because obviously the mind is really prone to projection, prone to particularly concluding falsely, right? And so when you deal with imaginal containers and with the information that comes through, you've got to be really careful. And I always tell my students who are practicing this stuff to treat visualizations, and particularly when the visualizations start seeming to have a mind of their own, seeming to act under their own agency, where you're not telling the visualization through intent to do something, but it does something anyway. To be really careful, to just treat it with common sense, the same kind of common sense you would use if you were to just go into a random city where they don't speak your language. And, how would you deal with the people you found on the street there? How would you deal with those external agents, right? The external agents of the people and the agency of the city, and of the culture. How would you deal with that? If someone showed up on day 2 promising you the world, would you listen to them? Probably not. You'd want to be a little bit careful. Might you meet someone on day one who turns out to be a long lost best friend and you guys just kick it off straight away? Sure, that's very possible. It's also possible that the person you meet on the first day who seems really good after you get to know them a little bit, you've gone out with them a bit, then they're actually up to no good secretly. They're kind of up to dodgy stuff or whatever. Um, and so you've got to keep your wits about you, right? And that's the same when you start interacting with external agents in the imaginal realm. And it's possibly even more tricky because not only are you dealing with who knows what forces, however fancily they're presenting themselves, you're also dealing with your own projections. And there's a real need to learn to navigate this with skill and clarity. Now, from a yin yang perspective, we've got the yin exercises, the internal exercises, and the yang exercises, the external exercises. So the internal exercises are when we go away from the mind, away from the visualizations, and towards the visceral sensory experience, as we do in Qigong and Neigong and Neidan. And these practices are inherently nourishing. Yin is absorption. Yin is this idea, the dynamic of yin includes nourishment and absorbing and soaking and kind of accumulating, and receptivity too, receiving. Whereas the yang dynamic is more about spending and projecting and expending, and fast changes and things like this. So when we're in the imaginal realm, when we're dealing with a projection of the mind, even if that projection is turned towards the body, it's still kind of in this more yang dynamic. You're still interacting with a facet of mind which is more subject to rapid change and which requires a spend of your energy to create the visual structure, to mold that and to shape that, and to keep it held and to maintain it and all of these kind of things. The visual practices are quite exhausting in this sense. So if you're low on energy, you really want to be spending more time with the direct awareness practices in the internal space and less time with visual practices. With a few exceptions, like I said, the visual practices can really be super useful for getting into diagnostics and stuff like that. They're also very useful for distance stuff. So I use visualizations when I do distance treatments with people, and they can be very, very effective. I sit in my room, and essentially what happens is I make a visualization of the person that I'm going to treat, and then I start interacting with that visualization. And hopefully a connection's there. Hopefully it makes a real connection, and hopefully that connection affects the changes made along that connection affect the person on the other end. But there's always the need to really verify it with the other person and verify it beyond the kind of um, you know, oh, it would have gotten better anyway argument. You need changes that are real, that are actually, like visceral physical changes. I've had patients that I've treated distance wise that have had problems that have been progressively getting worse, that have been treated by other doctors and gotten worse. And then I've done maybe 1 or 2 or 3 distance sessions with them where they haven't had any other interventions in that time with an issue that has been getting worse, and suddenly that issue resolves itself. So then you get okay, cool. There was actually an effect. There was a line of communication open, and through that communication, that sticking point of that issue found resolution. Great. I've also treated plenty of people, and not too many people who do healing will admit this, but I've treated plenty of people where they've just been like, nah, didn't feel nothing, no change, my problem's still there. I better go see a doctor about it. So these days with practice, my hit rate is much, much higher. I'm kind of in the 80% range, I would say, of reasonably successful treatments at distance. But I still have to be careful. I still have to pay attention. With repetition, you sort of get a taste for it. You kind of can get a sense for this connection and what it feels like when these imaginal containers have a connection behind them and when they don't. But even then, it's always necessary to kind of come back into the five senses, into the material world, and confirm there is a change, a shift that has taken place. That imaginal world needs to coalesce into a physical material change. Otherwise, it's just imagination. It's just a potential that was never realized. And you'll hear this a lot in the New Age thing. Oh, but the change happened in the astral, even though it didn't affect the physical, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, if it happened in the imaginal, who cares? It's not really affecting anything then. It's just an ethereal potential that shifted, and it can shift back because that realm is not as fixed. It can change, be great one day, horrible the next, great again, up, down. It's like my imagining of a Ferrari. I can imagine a Ferrari, and one day I'm really good at it, and the next day I can't quite picture it, and the next day, yeah, it's easy to picture. This is how this realm works. It's fickle. It's fickle, and it changes quickly, and it doesn't hold its form very easily. So you really need to make sure that, whatever you're doing with this realm, the interesting parts of it are the parts that actually land and stick and coalesce into something material. It's no good just having immaterial changes. So there's a bit of nuance and common sense to be had. And there's also a bit of strategy to bring around as to which practices to focus on. I was just talking with a friend recently, and his job, he's like profession is a psychic reader. And I was like, whoa, you've got to really, really balance that. That's a lot of interacting with this kind of like young, ethereal realm. You need direct awareness practices. You need to get down and into the body and not stay up in that realm and look down at the body, which I'm sure he could do very easily just because of his natural tendencies, but to actually get down into the body. And that's more difficult for him. But as I cued him into this, as I cued him to let go of the visualizations and let go of the imaginal and come down into the body, suddenly he's got more energy, he's more stable, he feels more grounded, he's not at the mercy of all every single person who's kind of in that ethereal realm gets thrown around by the changes in that realm, by little shifts in whatever the collective is thinking about, and it's like a big disaster for them. But when you get down into the materiality of the visceral interior world, things get really stable. You've got like this anchor that keeps you grounded. Now, if you want to be a specialist in internal cultivation, it's a very good idea to just completely do away with the visual practices, because, as I've mentioned, they're kind of like this young aspect that spends your resource, your internal resource, your chi, from that perspective, that spends that resource to create and maintain these visual containers, these imaginal containers that you can then use to communicate with the world out there. And if you're into the business of growing the biggest, most condensed Dantian in the whole planet and doing the circulations of the small orbit and blah, 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 then you might want to focus on that. You might want to drop those visual practices, and focus on the direct awareness practices. I have seen over and over and over and over and over and over again that there's a kind of one-way street here. And this is definitely something to consider with these practices, that it's very easy for me to take someone who is cultivated the internal direct awareness methods, like really built a Dantian without visualizations and released inside and filled the body with awareness and everything like this. Someone who's cultivated that and gone to the trouble, to the lengths to actually do that, it's easy to, within a weekend, teach them some basic visualization practices that build a pretty stable connection pretty quickly, and it works pretty well. The reverse is not true. And this is just something to do with the nature of yin and yang. If I've had plenty of people who've been doing, I've been doing Qigong for 40 years, And I say, okay, what have you been doing? Oh, yeah, they get me to visualize my Chong Mai as this beam of light, and I stay in that visualization, and I move my hands nice and gently like this. And I go, okay, that's cool, but let's try it my way. And I cue them to release awareness into the body. And suddenly they're in contact with all this stuff they were not in contact. But before, the body starts cooking, it starts simmering, it starts transforming, and usually pretty quickly they're in a very, very uncomfortable place and they can't manage it. They can't handle these very basic facets of internal training, which are really like the most beginner stuff. I'm not teaching these people anything fancy. It's like how to stand and how to kind of open and release in a very basic sense. And it's just really, really challenging and difficult. And of course it is, because they haven't actually been in that realm before. They've been interacting with the mind in their practice primarily. And so they're good with the mind, but not good with the body. Even if the mind has been looking at the body through these visualized processes, it's not the same. It's not the same order of experience. It's has almost no crossover whatsoever. I have met so many people who can, from their mind, get information about their body by scanning it, by using these visualized structures to talk to it and say, hey knee, what are you doing? Hey hips, what are you doing? And they can get information through those channels, but they cannot get intimate with the body. That method of visualization always keeps you at a distance from things. It keeps you far away from stuff because you go into the mind first, and the mind is kind of vast and spread out and without its limits and without its containment. And inevitably, all of these people really have a hard time. So coming from the visual realm into the interior realm is very difficult. And it can be a shock to the ego, who goes, well, I've done 40 years of training, and I can't even do this basic thing. Oh, well, I'm going to, ignore it and stick my head in the sand and pretend I didn't see that so I can go back to what I'm good at. That can be really, really difficult to confront those parts of ourselves that don't like to be shown where what we thought happened didn't actually happen. And the reverse is really a much easier way to go, because the young stuff, that when you're dealing with this kind of ethereal, imaginal realm, it's quick. You can teach someone those methods really quickly. Of course, it takes time to get good with them, but it's quick. Whereas the yin stuff is always bound by this kind of slow temporal, regular need to train daily for 10 years before it goes anywhere significant anyway. And it has this very slow burn to it, which isn't so appealing these days. But if I meet people who've gone through that already, the young stuff I can teach in a weekend. It's really not that hard, and it's actually way safer. So you have this kind of idea. That's an idea I use, is go down before you go up, go in before you go out. You can do it in parallel, but I would really do like an 80-20 weighting, where 80% of your time is on the in and down, cultivating the direct visceral experience of the body and actually just doing some good physical work, and only 20% of your time is spent in visualizations. Of course, that's presuming you're interested in that type of internal cultivation. I have met so many really wonderful people in the world of mysticism and esoterica and, the occult world and whatever else, who have used visualizations to build these relationships and so on and so forth. And they just have a wonderful life, and they're lovely people, and they're grounded, and they know themselves well, and they've dealt with all their crappy habits. And anytime you dedicate yourself to an art like that, there's bound to be interpersonal change. So it's not the only way to do things. I've met so many people who've used those methods very, very effectively. But is the big thing here. The real majority of them, not so much. Most people who are using visual practices, I would not call them particularly grounded, particularly stable. They all seem to be bound by the chaos of life, and really, really getting thrown around by it, from what I can see. Does not make them bad people, by the way. It's just a kind of observation of the 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 result of the cause that they're training, and the cause that they're training is this cultivation of the visual structure. So I'd really, really recommend people back off on the visual structures unless you have a really good mentor, someone who's very stable, who's grounded, who's down to earth, who themselves isn't suffering from this. Oh, it was Tuesday and Tuesday's the day, whatever, Mercury's in Gatorade, and that means I've got to lose my shit every single time some sort of astrological change happens. I would stay away from this. Find someone who's got stability and grounding in those arts if you're going to go into them. There is probably one person I would recommend in the public sphere teaching that stuff, who I can heartily say, yes, go check it out if you're interested in developing the imaginal visual side of things, and that's Josephine McCarthy. You can just look up her name. I'll put a link in the show notes. She's got this 17-year apprentice course that is completely free. And the first practices will be a bunch of really cool visualization practices for you to look into. But keep in mind that it's going to be a long, slow journey. And if you're already running low energy, it might be a while before those practices can be used to build that energy up. So, yeah, to be approached delicately, but Josephine's the bee's knees when it comes to that stuff. As far as internal stuff first goes, not too many people around teaching that stuff. Of course, I'm on the public sphere, and I do teach a little bits of the visualization too, as is my way, and that depends a lot on the student and their interests. But yeah, it's really good to get your head around it, to actually understand the different functions and the different layers of cause and effect that work with this stuff, to see that visual practices are really good for the young external aspect, for relating with external outside agency, relating with the world out there and all the various agencies that are out there. Whereas the Neigong and Neidan stuff done in a way where their visualizations are not included is really good for cultivating in here, in and down the yin aspect, which brings the grounding and brings the roots. Many people will be practicing internal work using visualization. So from this perspective, it's more like external cultivation of external relationship. And you can certainly use that to look at your body as an external agent and help tidy it up and help clean it up, but it doesn't produce the same results as going in with direct awareness. And in my experience, it's much more useful if I want to change the inside to really do it in a direct internal way rather than via these imaginal containers. Basically because the body and the unconscious is far smarter than this conscious mind is. The mode of releasing it to liberate it, and let it fill with awareness and reorganize itself, it's building a trust back into the unconscious, to trust that the unconscious linked with the body almost directly, like loads of the body is a physical expression of the unconscious. To just trust that unconscious knows what it's doing and can actually reorganize it, and all it needs is awareness. All it needs is this kind of fuel source of awareness. And when that fuel source really soaks down and through, the body is really capable of incredible things far beyond what we can conjure up with our imagination. So yeah, that was a bit of a kind of going here and there, a bit of a look into visualizations versus direct awareness. I'll leave you with one cue that I find works really well to help get you out of that visual mode, because so many people really struggle with this when they're training Qigong. Now, like, I get lots of people asking me, how do I get out of visualization? I try and feel my knee, but all that happens is I picture my knee in my mind. How can I get out of that? And a cue for that I really like using is to unhook awareness from the mind the mental structures, the visualizations, the conclusions, the analysis. Unhook awareness from the thoughts and analysis and release it into the felt visceral sense of the body. In short, unhook awareness from the mind, release it into the body, and let it soak into the body like butter soaking into warm bread. It's a nice little cue that if you practice that cue, okay, there's my mind, there's all the thinking about and the visualizing of my body. Unhook from all of that, release awareness through the body. And the little key you're looking for to know that this is happening effectively is that you stop experiencing the body as if you're in the command center of the mind looking down on the body, and start experiencing the body as if you're within the body looking out from the body. And this is obviously very quiet. The thoughts are kind of left behind up above somewhere, and you're no longer needing to refer to thoughts or conclusions to perceive the visceral sensations of the body. So try that next time you're practicing. If you're meant to be feeling your knee or your shoulder or your arm or your hip or whatever, try that cue, see if it helps. See if you can start to pick up the difference between direct awareness of the body and visualized experience of the body. See if you can notice the difference in the two modes of operation. It's good to practice the visualization just to understand what it feels like and what the experience is like, so that when you're not meant to be doing it in your practice, you know, oh, there's the visualization. I'm not doing that. Unhook from that back into direct awareness. So it can be really useful to practice a few basic visualizations just to get that in order. Now, if you're wanting to practice some visualizations, maybe you've done lots of direct awareness and you're like, hey, that visualization stuff sounds pretty neat. A very, very simple practice for this is to sit in your room on your bed, and then stand up, walk to your kitchen, look around, take in everything, and you're physically walking to your kitchen and walk back and sit back on your bed. From here, you're going to close your eyes and visualize yourself taking the same journey, taking in all the same information from your sight, from your sense of touch, from your soundscape. Smell and taste too are really, really good ones. So particularly if you have some incense or some nice cooking smells, you can really take all this in. So as you visualize yourself getting up from sitting on your bed, then you feel, what does the floor feel like under your feet? You imagine what the room looks like in your mind, what's in front of you, what's to your right, what's to your left, what do all like the dresses and everything in your room look like, where are the doors, what color is the paint on the wall, what's the ceiling look like, what's the fan in or the lights in your room look like. What do the windows look like? What are the blinds or curtains on the windows like? What are the, take in as much detail as possible, and then imagine yourself walking through your room. And, depending on where you are in your room, you might need to pass certain things. I know in my room, we've got like our little doggy bed at the end of the room. So I'll take that in my imagination. There's the little dresser just by the door. As I go through the door, there's that little picture there hung up, the light switch, the door opens that particular way. I step through the door into the living room, so on and so forth. And really taking in, what does it feel like as I step into the living room? I feel myself step off the carpet onto the tiles. The tiles are cool, they're hard. What do they feel like under my feet? What does the space of the living room look like? Oh, that's right. The couch is there. The lamp is there. The door is there. The curtains are just so. And you just want to practice imagining what your place that you spend the most time in looks like. And so this is a really nice practice to build your imaginative capacities. And one thing you can keep your eye out for is, as you get good at running this little course from your bed to your kitchen and back in your imagination, and after one or two times you'll be able to do this while you're out at the shops, at a cafe. Instead of getting on your phone and scrolling, you can just imagine yourself sitting in your room, walking to your kitchen and back. And then you can really start to go, well, what else is there? Is there anything else out of the ordinary there? Is there stuff in my room that doesn't look right, or that looks different colored, or anything like this? So you can start to get a sense for letting the room communicate details to you that you may not notice with your five senses. And different people will interpret these details in different ways. Some people will just feel that certain parts of the room are funky, bad energy, or whatever. You might see auras. You might even see characters or animals or all sorts of things. The imagination's pretty vast when it comes to how it filters these various details. And there's nothing to do about it. Like, just start taking it in and just get in the practice of walking back and forward in this place that you spend so much time in, that's very safe for you, that you know inside out. And honestly, if there's something really funky there, you can give me a buzz and I can try and help you sort it out. But it's not a big deal. It's not. We don't need to get all caught up in, oh, but I imagined that in that corner was a 30-foot demon, blah, 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 blah. Like, it doesn't matter. It's just your imagination. It's just your mind projecting. It's probably because you watched Game of Thrones earlier that night. Um, and maybe there's just a little bit of stagnant energy, and that's how your mind's filtered that energy. So it's really like, you don't want to get caught up trying to interpret it. Trying to interpret the imagination. Just let it run. Let your imagination move a bit more wildly than we allow it in the modern world. Let it really let it go to town. It's worthwhile practicing this kind of thing for a long time before you start to do anything too practical. But there's a lot of training involved in that, and it's a good idea to get some guidance. So again, if you're keen on that kind of thing, I can wholeheartedly recommend Josephine McCarthy. Her course is fantastic. That's enough on visualizations, internal and external. If you have any experience with this, you've gone from a visual practice to an internal practice, or you've only been in internal practices and been told that visual practices are the enemy, but you're actually kind of interested in it and wouldn't mind developing that side of things, drop me a message. Tell me what it's been like for you. Shoot me an email. I love geeking out about this stuff. And hopefully I hear from you soon, and I'll see you on the next podcast. Bye.